The night did not fall upon Kentucky. It sank as though drowning in its own weight. The cane fields shivered in rows, brittle stalks cutting the sky into serrated lines, and above them a smoke rose, not the smoke of hearth or harvest, but a darker veil, clinging to the lungs like wet burlap, stinking of molasses gone sour and of blood that had not cooled. The slaves knew the smoke's language. It carried whispers into their cabins, crawling beneath doors like a thing alive. They said it rose when the land grew restless, when the soil drank too much iron, when the overseer's whip had cracked too deep. That evening, the air tasted of iron. By the time the bell tolled for the last shift, the men worked without speaking. The cane groaned beneath their machetes, but each strike fell slower, as if the stalks fought to remain standing. Children fetching water lingered near the ditches, their eyes darting at the tree line where the smoke rolled thicker. No bird flew above the fields. No cricket sang, only silence, broken by a single voice. "It waits by the rows," old Isaac rasped, his lips torn white from chewing cane. The younger hands glanced at him with fear, not scorn. Isaac had seen 3 winters more than most were allowed, his back a tapestry of scars. And when Isaac spoke of shadows, no one dared laugh. The shadow had been sighted first by the boy Jacob, a thin-limbed child who still clung to scraps of dream. He swore he saw it kneeling where the lanterns would not reach, blacker than the night itself, folding and unfolding like smoke made of bone. Jacob said it had no face, yet eyes burned inside it, not bright but wet, as though freshly pulled from some body. "Don't look at it," Isaac warned. "It ain't meant for men's eyes. Look and it follows you in." The men turned their faces down. But children do not always listen, and Jacob had already looked. In the big house, where windows swelled with yellow candlelight, the masters spoke of supper. Sugar cakes, pork fat glistening, biscuits drowning in molasses. Their laughter bled across the fields like a wound reopening. Each sound was a command. Cut faster, bend lower, bleed sweeter, but the smoke heard them. The smoke crept closer. The first scream came from the far end of the rows. A machete clattered into the mud. The men froze, sweat stinging their backs, yet no overseer barked at them, for he too was silent. Only Jacob spoke, whispering, "It's standing now." No one turned their head. Not even when the stalks began to rustle, though there was no wind. Not even when the smoke bent low as though crawling on all fours. The lanterns flared once, and died. The men stumbled through dark, clutching children, gripping tools like crucifixes. But the shadow was faster. It passed from row to row, a ripple of blacker dark within the dark, until the air itself began to hum. A shape moved among them, neither man nor beast, its weight pressing against the ribs of all who stood near. It carried with it the stink of boiling sugar, sweet enough to rot teeth, sharp enough to gag. Then came the copper, the unmistakable tang of opened veins. Jacob whimpered. "Don't let it sit at the table," he whispered. Though no table lay in sight, from the big house a bell rang. The supper bell. But no hand pulled its rope. The slaves lifted their heads, hearing its hollow cry pour into the fields. With each toll, the shadow straightened, swelling as though fed. With each toll, the smoke grew thicker, crawling into mouths and throats, filling their lungs until breath itself became a prayer unsaid. Isaac fell to his knees. "It's begun," he rasped, clutching the dirt. "The land's calling them home." The cane split open. Not cut, not broken, but peeled as though a hand unseen ripped the stalks apart to make a path. And at the end of that path, the lanterns flickered back to life. Their flames burned low, green and sickly, casting light on the big house where laughter had stilled. The masters' voices were gone. Only the bell tolled once, twice, 13 times. Jacob tugged Isaac's sleeve, eyes wide, tears cutting through the soot on his cheeks. 13 chairs, he whispered. They said 13 chairs. Isaac turned, ready to hush him, but his tongue froze. For at the edge of the field, where the smoke opened like a curtain, the boy's words proved true. A long table stood in the dark, draped in white cloth, heavy with stains. Silver goblets glistened with wet, sticky red, and though only 12 figures sat there, the 13th chair waited. Empty, pulling breath from all who saw it, the night held still. The bell silenced, and the slaves understood what the masters never would. The table had been set, and someone or something was waiting to eat. Night never truly left the big house. It only learned to wear lace. By day, white curtains fluttered soft as bridal veils, perfumed candles burned in crystal, and laughter echoed through halls swollen with portraits. But when dusk came creeping, the curtains grew still. The air soured with candle smoke, and laughter curdled into whispers behind locked doors. At the highest window, the mistress kept her vigil. She was a woman carved from starch and bitterness, her face pale as unbaked dough, her fingers ink-stained from tally books. Her lips moved silently, counting names that had slipped from the fields like coins lost through cracks in a purse. 4, 7, 12. She tapped the glass with each number, the rhythm sharp as a coffin nail. Below, the cane bent under unseen weight. Some called it wind, though no breeze dared move on nights like this. The slaves had vanished before, a few each season, swallowed by swamps or fleeing into the north. But this tally was different. They were not gone in 2s or 3s, but in whole lines, men and women whose machetes still gleamed in the soil, children whose baskets lay overturned, spilling cane like entrails. The mistress recorded them carefully as though debts owed to her, as though each missing body belonged not to the earth or to God, but to her account ledger. For every soul gone missing, a mark was made. For every mark, a weight pressed deeper into the wood of her desk until the carvings shone like scars. 13, she murmured at last, breath trembling against the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, not pale now but bruised, the eyes blackened as if gripped by sleeplessness or by hands unseen. The servants spoke of her ledger, bound in hide no one dared to name. They said she tallied bones as though they might one day rise to contest her count. And the strange thing was this. When she pressed her ear against the pages, she swore she could hear scratching. Not the scratch of pen nor the shuffle of insects, but the stubborn clawing of something buried alive. On the second toll of the supper bell, she heard them again, scratch, scratch, scratch. The sound rose through the floorboards, traveled up the rafters, rattled her shutters like knuckles knocking. She flinched, then stiffened, her mouth tightening into the cruel smile of one who dares not show fear. They will not rise, she told the silence. They are accounted for. But silence is not a thing that listens. Silence swells until it drowns. That night the household did not eat. The servants had vanished from the kitchen, pots overturned, dough left rising until it collapsed into itself. And yet the dining room table stood set. 13 chairs, 13 goblets, silver polished until it burned green in the candlelight. The mistress walked among them, touching each chair as if to assure herself it was wood, not bone. Her hand paused at the 13th seat. No cushion, no plate, no cup, only emptiness yawning like an open grave. She drew her breath sharply, then marked it down. One more. At her window again, she looked down upon the fields. The smoke had thickened, curling around the cane like a black serpent. Somewhere within, she thought she saw figures moving, not running, not working, but swaying, their heads bent at unnatural angles, their arms stiff as scarecrows. The numbers in her head began to tremble, slipping from her lips like prayers forgotten halfway through. 14, 17, 19. The count grew longer than her own memory. The field seemed crowded, though she knew the cabins lay empty, and then the glass beneath her fingertips grew cold. Not the chill of night air. This was deeper, the cold of stone sealed in crypts, the cold of hands that never bled warmth. Her tally book on the desk creaked open of its own accord. The pages fluttered, though no wind stirred, settling on a sheet she had not written. There, in a hand jagged and wet, was a number scrawled across the parchment. The ink did not dry. It dripped, red and viscous, running down the margins, seeping into the wood, and from below the scratching grew louder. The mistress backed from her desk, her heels catching the hem of her gown. The air swelled with the stench of earth overturned, as though graves yawned open across the fields. Her reflection in the window no longer mimicked her movements. It stared back with lips unmoving, eyes hollow, head tilting as though counting her. The scratching stopped, and in that silence, she realized the ledger was no longer keeping her tally. It was keeping hers. The blades were not found in a chest, nor upon a wall, nor hanging in any forge. They were simply there one morning, glistening like teeth along the dirt of the cane rows, rustless, silent, waiting. Each blade was wrong, too narrow to cut cane, too curved to skin animals, too heavy to belong to human hands. And yet they breathed, faintly like a sleeping thing, the metal fogging with a warmth no hearth had granted. When Jacob first touched one, he swore it sighed. The boy dropped it instantly, but the sound lingered in his palm, a ghost of breath pressing against his skin. Old Isaac crossed himself and spat into the mud. "These ain't tools," he muttered. "These are hungers. And hunger don't stay still." The overseer claimed them. He gathered the knives into his arms, chuckling, their weight too great even for his swollen frame. "Fine iron, sharper than Yankee steel," he boasted, dragging them to the big house. But the slave saw how his hands bled where the hilts had kissed his flesh. The mistress did not speak when she saw them laid across her table. Her eyes flickered once, recognition or fear before she turned her face away. Yet that night her window remained unlit. In the cabins, whispers spread like fire. Some said the blades had risen from beneath the fields, unearthed by roots pulling against the soil. Others said they were hammered by no man, but by the land itself, shaped from centuries of sweat and blood. Honed sharp by the cries that never left the night, Isaac told of an older tale, that when the earth grew swollen with grief, it fashioned its own teeth to chew the living. "They ain't knives," he whispered, voice breaking. "They're mouths." The overseer did not sleep. The blades drew him back each night. He set them in rows upon the table, polished them though they never dulled, counted them though their number shifted. 12 one night, 14 the next, 11 the following. No ledger could hold them steady, and always when his lantern dimmed, he swore they shifted closer to him. On the third night he carved his hand by accident. The cut was clean, blood rushing hot across his palm. But the blade did not stain. It drank. The wound burned not with fever but with cold, a cold that climbed his wrist, his arm, until his breath turned to mist in the summer air. He bound it in cloth, but the bandage blackened by dawn, stiff as bark. By the fourth night his hand was gone, eaten away to the elbow. And yet he still polished the knives, smiling through gritted teeth as though it pleased him. The slaves refused to step near the big house. They watched from the fields, torches trembling in their grip, as the overseer laid the blades upon the long table, where the mistress once tallied her debts. One by one the knives set themselves upright, tips balancing upon wood as though summoned to stand. The 13th chair sat empty still, but the knives leaned toward it. That evening Jacob dreamed. He saw the knives in the fields, buried not in soil but in flesh. Rows of bodies lay open, ribs pried wide, the blades resting where hearts once beat. The air reeked of molasses and marrow, the sweetness of sugarcane boiled with human fat. When Jacob awoke, his palms were cut. No blade near him, no wound he could explain. Only shallow lines across his skin, as though fingers of steel had traced him while he slept. The overseer vanished on the 5th night. The table remained, but the knives were gone. All save one, a single curved blade left in the 13th chair, glistening wet, though no blood stained the floor. The mistress found it at dawn. She lifted it with trembling hands, pressing its cold against her cheek as though listening. Her lips parted in a whisper, though no one could hear the words. And from the fields beyond, the smoke thickened, curling higher, as if answering her. The knives had not been forged. They had been born, and the land was hungry still. The table stretched longer than the room that held it. Its legs seemed to root into the earth, not the floor, as though grown from the soil itself. Candles guttered above, their flames pale and sickly green, dripping wax that never cooled. Silver goblets trembled upon their bases, ringing faintly like struck bells, though no hand touched them. No blessing was spoken. No hymn rose, only silence, heavy as grave soil pressed against the walls until even breath felt like a trespass. The mistress stood at the head, pale hands resting upon the chair carved high like a throne. Her face bore the stiffness of one who had not slept for nights, her lips pulled tight as stitches across a wound. Before her 12 chairs lay filled, though none had been filled by the living. The overseer was among them, slumped in posture, his left sleeve pinned with darkness where his arm had ended. Beside him sat the butler, his mouth full of blackened molasses, his teeth sinking deeper though his jaws no longer moved. The cook, the maids, the field boss, all sat stiff, their eyes clouded, their hands folded neatly in their laps like children taught obedience in death. And at the far end, the 13th chair waited. The knives gleamed between the plates, not placed there but grown there. blades piercing the tablecloth from beneath, roots of steel curving upward to rest beside untouched spoons. Each knife breathed, fogging faintly as though waiting for meat. A bowl at the center steamed with red gravy, the smell sharp enough to clot the throat. The slaves who watched from the doorway held cloth to their mouths, yet the sweetness still invaded, sickly, clinging like syrup to the tongue. No one dared enter, though the mistress's eyes shifted toward them, seeing though she never turned her head. "Sit," she whispered. The sound barely carried, yet it struck every ear as though spoken at the nape of the neck. Jacob clung to Isaac's coat. "We can't," the boy whispered. "It's not for us," but the table heard him. The goblets shivered harder, their rims singing a low, mournful note. The candles bent toward the doorway, stretching like fingers hungry for flesh. The mistress did not speak again. Her silence was command enough. The slaves fled into the fields, but the air followed them, heavy, syrup-sweet, the kind that clings to the ribs until breath falters. And behind them, from the big house, came a sound no ear could mistake. Chairs scraping across wood, slowly, deliberately, one after another. Inside, the table began to move. Its length stretched further, planks groaning as though the wood itself had bones. The rafters bent, beams sagging. Yet the table demanded more space, widening the room as if walls meant nothing to it. The figures in the chairs stirred, though their lungs had long since stilled. The overseer lifted his goblet, empty eyes fixed upon the mistress. The butler's lips cracked as though preparing to speak, but only a hiss escaped, wet and bubbling. Each figure lifted their cup, their knives, their forks, and yet not a prayer rose. The silence thickened. It coated every tongue, every ear, every thought. It was the silence of graves, not absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, swallowing noise whole. The mistress finally raised her goblet. Her eyes flickered once toward the 13th chair, still empty, though the cushion bore the shape of something sitting there. She did not drink. She only smiled faintly, as though appeased, and then the knives struck. They carved not flesh but air. Blades cut across the silence itself, rending it into ribbons. Each strike echoed, a screamless howl like voices trapped in the walls finally torn free. The silver clattered against plates, against wood, against bone. For beneath the cloth something shifted, groaning, as though the table itself was fed. The goblets brimmed with dark liquid where none had been poured. The bowls overflowed with red gravy, though no hand ladled it. And the mistress, with unblinking eyes, whispered, "They are counted." The slaves outside fell to their knees, covering their ears, but it was too late. The silence broken had become a sound, a shriek that carried no air, a vibration that rattled their teeth, their bones, their very breath. The cane bent as though bowing, the smoke thickened into a wall, and the supper bell rang again, once, twice, 13 times, and when it stilled, the table was empty, empty of figures, empty of knives, empty of all save for the 13th chair, which was now filled. It was never truly empty. By lantern light, by moonlight, by the pale shiver of dawn, the 13th chair always seemed bare, waiting, its cushion sagging like the belly of the starved. But in the corner of one's eye it was never unoccupied. A presence weighed upon it, darker than shadow, heavier than breath. Those who dared sit did not rise again. Their bodies withered as if drained by roots pulling downward, and when they fell still, their voices lingered, circling the rafters, caught in the air like moths that refused to die. The chair itself bore no beauty. Its wood was not carved with grace nor polished by care. It was crude, made from planks rough-hewn, splintering, stained dark in ways no polish could cleanse. Yet its place was at the head of the table, across from the mistress's throne-like seat. A throne set for something unseen. The slaves knew the rule: do not touch the chair, do not look at it too long, do not whisper its name, for the chair had a name though no man dared utter it. But hunger makes fools of the fearful, and when rations dwindled, when scraps vanished from kitchens left mysteriously bare, one of the field hands, a boy no older than 15, crept into the dining room. He saw bread steaming hot upon the 13th plate, meat glistening with fat, and a cup brimming with wine that reeked of sugar. He sat. The others found him the next morning. The bread was gone, the meat devoured, the cup overturned. But the boy was not at the table. He was sprawled across the floor, lips blue, stomach shrunken, as if all nourishment had been stolen from his veins. From his mouth poured only a trickle of sugar crystals, sharp as glass, cutting his tongue as they spilled. His voice, however, lingered. It clung to the rafters, whispering prayers in a tone no human throat could shape. It begged for freedom one moment, and for another bite the next. The boy was buried by the cane fields. But each time the supper bell rang, his voice answered from the big house, calling the hungry to join him. The mistress began to smile at the chair. Her gaze lingered on it longer than on her own kin, her own servants, her own house. She spoke softly at night, her lips moving in half-conversations, nodding at pauses only she could hear. The ledger upon her desk gained new marks, scratched not by her pen but by another hand entirely. And yet when she counted aloud, she always stopped at 13. Never more, never less. Isaac told the others what he had once heard in the swamps, from an old woman with eyes white as river stones. A 13th seat is never for men, she had told him. 12 may feast, but 13 feeds. He warned them the chair was not meant to hold the living. It was an altar, a mouth, a grave disguised as furniture. But Jacob did not listen. Children never do. One night, while the cabins lay restless, Jacob slipped from his bed. He told no one. He wanted to see if the whispers were true, if voices really lingered, if the chair really breathed when touched. The door to the dining room opened without protest. The air inside was thick with the smell of syrup and wet earth, sweet enough to gag, heavy enough to drown. The table gleamed beneath the candles, and the 13th chair sat waiting, its cushion already indented as though someone had only just risen. Jacob crept closer. His bare feet stuck to the floorboards, as though the wood itself wished to keep him. And as he neared the chair, he felt the presence stir. The cushion sank deeper. The wood creaked. And though no one sat there, the imprint of elbows pressed against the tablecloth. "Sit," a voice whispered. Not from the mistress, not from the rafters, not from the dead, but from everywhere, the floor, the air, the marrow in Jacob's bones. "Sit, sit, sit." He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing the back of the chair. It was warm, too warm, as though another body had risen only moments before, leaving its heat behind. The goblets rattled. The knives hummed. The entire table leaned toward him in one long groan of wood and bone. And then Jacob blinked. The chair was no longer empty. It steamed in the pot like blood unwilling to clot, sweet as Sunday supper, thick enough to paint the air. Every breath near it was iron, a perfume of rust and marrow that clung to the throat. The kitchen, once rattling with spoons and laughter, now stood silent, as if the stew itself hushed all sound. Only the simmering remained, a steady burble like the low hum of bees trapped inside a coffin. No one dared ask what meat simmered in its depths. The mistress loved the dish most of all. She called it gravy, though it was no such thing. It was too dark, too thick, too alive. Each ladle lifted from the pot came away heavy, strings of flesh clinging like veins, droplets hissing when they struck the coals. She served it with ceremony. A silver spoon for herself, pewter for the others, and wooden bowls for those who had no choice but to eat. The first taste was always met with silence, for to speak while swallowing was to choke, not from manners but from weight. The broth coated the tongue, settled into the stomach and lingered long after as if it had no wish to leave. There were rules unspoken yet known. Never scrape the bottom of the pot. Never peer too long into the steam, for shapes sometimes moved there. A finger curling, an eye blinking, a jaw that gnashed without sound. And above all, never ask what beast had been slain to fill it, for the mistress did not hunt, nor did her kin. The cane fields were lean, the barns empty of swine, the coops silent of chickens. Yet the pot was always full every night, bubbling as though fed by something deeper than soil. The slaves whispered that the meat was not of hog or cow, nor any creature named by men. They told stories in the dark, of children taken by the 13th chair, their bodies never found, of bones carted out behind the smokehouse but never buried whole, of screams that were heard not in the fields but muffled, wet, beneath the kitchen floorboards. And still the mistress ate. She licked her spoon clean until it gleamed like a mirror, then dipped it again, smiling at each mouthful, as if the broth whispered secrets only she could taste. Her skin grew flushed, her eyes gleamed redder with each serving, and her hands shook when she was denied it. One night, Isaac was sent to stir the pot. The others warned him, "Do not scrape, do not lean too close." But the mistress demanded, and refusal was worse than death. He lifted the spoon, stirred slow, careful. The broth groaned as if resisting, and then the ladle struck something hard at the bottom. Not bone. No, bone clicks and clatters. This was different. He lifted. The pot's surface broke with a shape pale as wax. A hand, it was small, curled as if still clinging to life. Skin boiled, nails blackened. Yet when the air struck it, the fingers twitched, not by chance but in recognition, as though reaching for Isaac's face. He dropped the spoon. The pot shuddered. The broth swallowed the hand again, drawing it back down into its red womb. The steam rose thicker now, and in it Isaac swore he saw faces. Mouths open, eyes wide, their silent screams rolling in the vapor. Children, men, women, all lost, all consumed. The mistress entered, her lips shining with fat, her teeth red as berries. "You stirred too deep," she said. Her voice was soft, sweet, but the air around her bent like grass before fire. "You saw what wasn't meant for you." Isaac fell to his knees, trembling. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick, coated with a taste that wasn't his, for the steam had entered him. It clung to his mouth, seeped into his lungs, made his stomach ache with hunger not his own. "You will eat," the mistress whispered, guiding his head toward the pot. Her fingers, cold as wet stone, pressed the back of his neck. "You will eat, and you will never again ask where the meat comes from." He fought, but the smell broke him. It was sweetness sharpened with iron, a promise of fullness that gnawed at the hollow in his belly. His lips parted. The ladle rose. The broth touched his tongue, and he swallowed. The room dimmed, the voices in the steam grew louder, and Isaac's eyes rolled white as his body bent. The pot boiled harder, hungrier, as though fed not only by wood and fire but by his very soul. That night the others lay awake in the cabins listening. The big house was quiet, too quiet until they heard it. Isaac's voice, not in pain, not in prayer, but humming softly from the kitchen hearth. A lullaby, one none of them knew, one that did not belong to the living. The cane fields whispered at night, though no wind passed through the stalks. Something moved there, how, not beast, not man, but the shape of a hunger-given form. Those who labored at dusk swore they saw it. Dark figures bent low, gnawing not at corn or cane, but at the very darkness itself. And when they lifted their heads, mouths slick with black, the night around them seemed thinner, starved. The cane cutters swore they saw men chewing shadows in the fields. But shadows cannot scream when bitten. By day the stalks rattled as always, green and sharp, the sun striking them gold. Yet even then, the cutters worked with unease, for between the rows lay prints too wide, too long, as if feet had dragged themselves upright only half a century ago and learned to walk anew. These prints never led to the cabins nor to the big house. They ended abruptly, as if the walkers had dissolved into the air itself. The old ones whispered that this hunger was born the night Isaac tasted the red gravy. That his voice humming in the kitchen had not been his voice at all, but the echo of something older, fed by his flesh. And now it roamed the fields with legs and teeth, seeking more. One dusk Samuel, a cutter with arms like iron, swore he saw his own shadow lag behind him. The sun was low, the stalks casting long black blades across the dirt. He moved forward, but his shadow stayed crouched, chewing on its own arm. When he turned, there was nothing, only the soft rustle of cane. But that night his bed was found empty, his boots still by the door. Another swore he heard chewing beneath the earth like roots tearing. Each bite shook the soil, sent ripples through the stalks until a figure rose half-formed. A head without a face, a mouth without eyes. It staggered on two legs, dripping black saliva, before dissolving back into the dark. The mistress began to notice, too. Her suppers grew quieter. More seats sat empty. When she counted the workers from her balcony, she always came up short. But her smile widened, for she never punished their absence. She only whispered, "The fields are feeding." The slaves spoke in hushed voices, fearing the stalks might hear. They said the hunger had no stomach, no throat, no end. It bit at shadows, then at men, then at memory itself. One boy claimed his brother was taken not in body, but in recollection. For the next morning no one could remember his name. Yet they all recalled a voice calling their own from the fields at night. One evening the bell rang for supper, but half the men never returned. Those who did stumbled in pale, their mouths bleeding as though from unseen teeth. When asked, they only shook their heads, whispering, "It chews what follows us. It chews the part that clings." Their shadows were gone. The firelight revealed only their feet, their hands their weary faces, but behind them the ground lay empty. That night, the cabins filled with unease. Children pressed against their mothers, afraid to sleep, afraid their own shadows might wander off and never return. And outside, beyond the walls, the chewing grew louder, wet, gnashing like meat torn in the jaws of something starved. The fields moved, though no wind stirred. The cane bent low as though something taller than men passed between them. Then came the scream. It was not human nor beast. It was thinner, sharper, like a shadow itself crying out as it was split in two. The cabins shook. The lanterns dimmed. And all at once the chewing stopped. Silence, but silence is only the breath between bites. The big house was built on timber, cut from the very woods it devoured. Cypress and oak felled in the swamps, their roots still choking with mud, their trunks heavy with water. The boards creaked as though they had never dried, groaning when walked upon, shuddering when silence dared to linger. But at night the wood swelled, not with water, not with rot, but with a dark seep that rose between the cracks like sweat from a fevered brow. It smelled of copper and sweet decay, a smell that clung to teeth, to fingernails, to dreams. Those who slept above it heard a dripping, slow, deliberate, not of rain, but of something thicker, heavier, reluctant to fall. At night, the wood swelled with a dark, sticky seep. Guests stepped lightly, but the stains followed them home. The mistress never spoke of it, though she smiled when the stains grew. She placed rugs upon rugs, but the seep always rose through, darkening the threads, spreading in patterns like veins. No brush nor cloth could wash it away, for it was not spilled, it was born. The house itself was feeding. Visitors noticed, of course. Merchants called to trade sugar and cotton. Preachers drawn to bless the land. Hunters who came with tales of wolves in the swamp. They walked the parlor floors, boots sticky after a single step, and glanced down to see the wood glistening red-black beneath their soles. Some crossed themselves. Some said nothing, but none left untouched, for the stains followed them. Weeks later, their wives found their bed linens marked with the same seep, their doorsteps damp each morning, their children waking with red at the corners of their mouths. In the cabins, the slaves whispered it was not the wood that dripped, but the bodies beneath it, that the big house was no house at all, but a coffin turned upside down, its lid nailed poorly. They said if one pressed an ear to the boards, they could hear it, not water, not blood, but a gurgling, a chorus of throats still trying to sing, and indeed, some tried. Children dared one another to lie flat in the parlor when no white eyes watched. They pressed their faces to the wood, trembling, and always they rose pale, speechless, their lips trembling with words they dared not repeat. One guest, a Reverend Cole from Savannah, lingered too long in the hall. He crouched, peered close at the cracks, and whispered a prayer over the seep. But the wood hissed back a sound like hot fat on iron, and the seep bubbled higher. A drop splashed upon his cheek, burning, sweet as syrup and foul as a grave. The Reverend screamed. He clawed at his face, tearing skin, until only a weeping hole remained where his eye had been. And when the mistress came to hush him, she only laughed. "Now you see," she whispered, her smile wide as the boards groaned beneath them. "Now you see what feeds us." That night the dripping grew louder. The house shivered as though a storm pressed upon its walls, though the air outside was calm, still heavy with the scent of cane. Each drop struck the floor with weight enough to echo through the halls. The walls darkened, the rugs soaked, and the seams of the boards swelled until they cracked. From beneath came not only liquid, but breath. A warm exhale rising through the cracks, humid, foul, brushing against the ankles of those who walked the halls. It smelled of opened graves. It smelled of bellies split wide. It smelled of hunger unending. One child, Sarah, the housemaid's daughter, woke in the night to footsteps. She followed them barefoot into the parlor. There she saw the boards bending upward, as if something pressed from beneath. Knots swelled like blisters. The seep ran in rivulets, thick and shining in the moonlight, and then with a groan one board split. From the crack slid not blood, but a finger, small, pale, twitching as though seeking a hand to hold. Then another, until a dozen little fingers pawed at the air, dripping with the red-black syrup of the house. Sarah did not scream. Her voice lodged in her throat. She only backed away step by step, until the parlor door closed by itself, and the dripping hushed into silence once more. But silence never lasts. For silence is only the pause before another drop falls, and in the morning the boards were smooth again. No cracks, no stains, no sign of what had risen in the night. Only Sarah's footprints remained, leading away into nothing. The bell was hung in the rafters, cast of bronze greened with age, its tongue chipped yet eager. No hand ever pulled its rope, no servant ever dared touch it. And yet when night fell thickest, when the air turned syrup dark, it rang. Slow, heavy, like a knuckle knocking at the coffin lid, each toll pulled the living closer to the table. Each toll fed the unseen thing that crouched beneath it. The first toll was always felt before it was heard. A tremor in the chest, a tug at the stomach, a hollowing in the bones. The sound followed, swelling low, shivering the glass, rattling the pewter, making the spoons tremble in their drawers. By the second toll, footsteps began to move of their own accord. Men rose from their beds, women dropped their tools, children sat upright as though strung by wires. They shuffled without speech, without choice, toward the long table in the hall. Their eyes wide, their mouths slack, their shadows stretched behind them like ropes dragged across the floor. The bell tolled thrice. The candles in the hall flared, their wax dripping faster, as if burning to keep up. Silver goblets shook in their places, and the mistress smiled, her hands folded in her lap, her lips already glistening red as though she had supped before the rest. But it was the fourth toll that fed. The air pressed heavy, bending the table legs, darkening the floorboards. From beneath something shifted. The wood swelled, buckled, as though knees pressed against it from below, crouching, waiting. A sound like breath rose between the cracks, slow, wet, eager, and the bell kept tolling, its tongue swinging with no rope, its bronze humming as if kissed by invisible lips. Each strike louder, each echo longer, until the very marrow of those gathered began to tremble loose. The guests did not resist. They sat. Their chairs scraped the floor in perfect unison as though rehearsed, hands folded, heads lowered, waiting. The mistress lifted her goblet. The unseen thing beneath the table shifted again, pressing harder, making the wood groan as though it might snap. Some swore they saw its fingers, long and pale, brushing the undersides of the planks. Others said they felt its breath on their calves, damp and rank, but none dared move. The bell would not let them. When the ninth toll came, the first plate appeared, not carried, not served. It simply manifested, steaming, glistening, its contents indistinguishable but thick with iron scent. The second plate followed. Then a third, until the table was full, each place set with a portion too heavy to lift, too alive to ignore. The bell rang its 10th note, and the unseen thing beneath whispered in voices not its own. The voices of the missing, the voices of the buried, the voices of shadows chewed into silence. Eat. The mistress raised her spoon, dipped it deep, and the others followed, their hands shaking but compelled, their eyes brimming with tears. Each mouthful was swallowed with a sound more desperate than hunger. And below, the unseen thing drank in their chewing, their swallowing, their very souls passing through the floorboards as offerings. Then the bell tolled once more, alone, final. The sound rattled through the house, through the fields, through the bones of all who heard. And with it the table buckled, splitting down the center. From the crack below, two hands rose, vast, veined, dripping red, pressing against the wood as if ready to emerge. The candles blew out. The goblets toppled, and in the silence after the bell's last toll, something climbed up from beneath. The table waited. Its oak was darker than any tree that had grown in Kentucky soil, its length stretching farther than the room itself, farther than the eye could follow. Silver gleamed upon it, polished though no servant's hand had touched the metal in years. Plates sat steaming, though no fire was lit. Goblets brimmed, though no hand had poured, laid with silver, with flesh, with silence. To sit was to vanish, to eat was to be eaten, and to rise was never promised. The bell had stopped ringing, but its echo lingered in the marrow. Those drawn to the table no longer moved of their own accord. They drifted, feet sliding as though carried on invisible strings. One by one they sat, filling every chair. Even the 13th, empty for so long, held a shadow now, a presence without face, without flesh. Only weight pressing the wood. The mistress presided. Her smile stretched wide, her lips dark with juices that glistened like tar. Her spoon tapped the rim of her bowl once, twice, thrice, And at that sound, every guest lifted their own. The first bite was not food, it was memory. The sweetness of a mother's lullaby boiled into bitterness. The sting of a first kiss, salted until the tongue bled. The pain of every lash, every prayer unanswered, stewed until the broth thickened with despair. Each mouthful devoured not only the flesh before them, but pieces of themselves. They ate their voices, their laughter, their shadows. The table feasted upon them as they feasted upon it. Beneath, the unseen thing stirred louder. Hands gripped the planks, pressing upward, smearing red across the underside. A groan ran through the house, through the bones of those seated until the very air trembled. The goblets quivered, spilling black wine that stained the floor. One man tried to stand. His chair clung to him. The wood fused, tendrils of oak wrapping around his thighs, holding him fast. He screamed, but the table swallowed the sound, feeding it to the plates which steamed brighter in gratitude. Another guest turned her head and found no one beside her, though moments before the seats were full. The table lengthened endlessly, swallowing those at its edges, drawing them into a horizon of silver and bone. She looked back and found herself seated alone, yet still surrounded by the sound of chewing. The mistress ate with abandon, her spoon clinking louder than all others combined. Each bite swelled her, her body stretching thin as if filled not with food but with smoke and shadow. Her eyes burned red, her skin glowed feverish, and her teeth gleamed sharp. She licked the bowl clean, then reached for another, not from her place but from the plate of the one seated nearest. Her hands were no longer hands but talons. Her lips no longer lips but a maw that unhinged, devouring whole what had once been her kin, and the guests continued. Their spoons moved though their hands trembled. Their mouths opened though their throats bled. They ate because the table demanded it. And the table ate because hunger was all it had ever known. At the far end, the 13th chair scraped back. Empty and then filled, then empty again in flashes like lightning. Each time it appeared, something larger sat there. Something the eye refused to hold, yet the stomach knew. This was hunger given form. This was the true master of the feast. It leaned forward unseen, its weight bending the table, its breath extinguishing every candle. And in the dark, the sound of chewing grew louder. Not many mouths now, but one. One endless mouth devouring all wood and flesh, shadow and soul. When the lanterns flickered back, the table was bare. No silver, no goblets, no guests. Only the mistress remained, her chair splintered beneath her. Her body swollen and torn, her smile carved wider than her face, and before her, the table stretched on still, into the dark, into the earth, into eternity. Set once more, waiting for the next toll of the bell.